Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of stats, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and injury insurance on your picks are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million players who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100 for a first deposit matchup to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.
Welcome to the Meet the Mancunian podcast season 4. I'm Deepa Thomas Sutcliffe, your friendly host. On the streets and nooks of Manchester, my inspiring Mancunian guests tackle their causes with their grit and passion. They are leaders, worker bees, and community hosts, and they share their stories to inspire you all through this season. Relax, grab a brew, and listen in to the Meet the Mancunian on Apple, Google, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcasting platforms. You can also check out all the episodes on my new website, www.meetthemancunian.co.uk. Looking to help the homeless overcome poverty? We hear from Yvonne Hope, CEO, Barnabas, in this episode. I'm delighted to introduce my guest, Yvonne Hope, CEO, Barnabas. Thank you so much, Yvonne, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Deepa.
No, it's exciting. I'm looking forward to learning about all the great work that you're doing over the many years that Barnabas has been active in Manchester. But before that, can you tell us about how you started how did your passion for the homeless really start, and what's the origins of that?
I guess I was always interested in working in a charity. I always wanted to help. I always felt like I had something to give back. But I didn't really have the confidence to do that for a long time. And I moved to Manchester in 2002 to raise my family. And then about 7 years later, I'd become a Christian in that time. I received what I could only call a call from God. Ironically, on the M60 when I was driving to work one day.
Wow.
And that was a very surreal experience, but I knew instantly that I wasn't supposed to be carrying on with sales and marketing and corporate careers, and I knew that was the time to give up. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to help people who were finding it hard to have a voice. And in that, I guess a lot of my own background growing up I wouldn't say grew up in poverty, but we definitely weren't well off. We definitely had a lot of disadvantages, particularly because my parents are immigrants and, we're first generation immigrants to this country. I really wanted to do something that made a difference. And about, 3 years after I had that call from God, I'd been volunteering all over where I live and trying different things because I thought maybe I was supposed to work with young people, which was a real passion. I had a little advert in my church magazine and it said wanted receptionist, minimum wage, £5 an hour. Come and work for us. And it was exactly the hours that I needed so that I could drop my children to school and pick them up. And I thought, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to go for this. But I really felt like it was my job. And my mother was horrified. She said she couldn't believe that she'd sent me to university to have a great career in, and I was going to go and work with tramps, in her own words. And it was very hard to convey how much this job resonated with me. I met the founders. They were inspirational. They had taken this charity from the back of their van, just the two of them going out with sandwiches and coffee, to, pretty much where I took over. And I realised straight away, these are people who don't have a voice. These are the least electorally attractive people in the country, and they don't attract any attention. And I knew straight away that that was what I wanted to do, because I genuinely do not believe that anybody should be living on the streets or should be made homeless.
That's amazing. So you had this calling from God, as you said, and then you found that perfect ad in the church magazine. So, serendipity there. So sounds like it's a great way to get involved. And tell us about specific. So was the charity that you're referring to, the way you joined as a receptionist, Barnabas?
That is Barnabas. So
From receptionist to CEO, what's the story there?
so I have to be honest and say, I wasn't. Uh, I wasn't a receptionist in the job I did before. I had had a career full of roles in different industries, all marketing, and I'd really enjoyed my career. It was feeling very empty, I suppose, and I really felt there was more to do. I've always been someone who worked from the ground up. I was never scared of going in at the bottom. I never felt like I had to go in at manager level, because I like to learn everything about where I am. Um, so yeah, going to the receptionist, it was good. It was good for me because I knew nothing. I was going into a sector I knew nothing about, and I was literally like a sponge. I wanted to learn everything. I was probably really annoying to work with because I was always asking questions, and people were always thinking, "Goodness, how can she not know that?" And then I was saying, "Well, I can tell you all about warehousing and I can tell you all about e-commerce, but I don't know anything about helping people." So it was amazing. Very quickly, the lady I went to work for, who's now our head of fundraising, said, "You're not really a receptionist, are you?" And they said, "Well, you be the office manager." But it was very apparent that Barnabas, I joined at a point at which Barnabas was growing really fast. Barnabas had started in 1991 with our founders, Peter and Beryl Green. And they'd kind of got the whole of the churches in Manchester behind them, because Peter similarly had had a similar feeling that, he should be doing something around his Christian faith, and he couldn't believe people were still on the streets, similar to me. And he kind of took this from, this out grassroots on the streets feeding organisation to buying a property on Bloom Street in the gay village, and expanding from there. By the time I took over, the numbers of rough sleepers were going up. By the time I joined, rough sleepers were going up. It was not uncommon by the time I took over from Peter and Beryl in 2016 that we would see 90 people a morning just for breakfast. If you ever come to the Beacon, you would see what a tiny little space it is. And to this day, I do not know how we fed that many people. And I can only say Barnabas it's always been powered by its volunteers. I've never worked with such inspirational people who give up their own time, and really want to make a difference. I think that's what I really love about Barnabas, is that it's not just the staff who feel this way, it's the volunteers, it's the supporters, it's the trustees. It feels like a movement of people all wanting the same social outcome, that, we're our own levelling up department, I always think. Yeah, so
That is an interesting reference, but because I have international guests, you want to explain that, please?
yes, I will. So in Britain, we have a real problem with what we call social mobility, and I've experienced this firsthand. It's very, very difficult to pull yourself out of poverty. It's very, very hard to move towards a stable income, to become a householder, to be in this place where you're never worrying about where your next meal is going to come from. And particularly, I would say, social mobility has come to an almost complete halt in the UK. It's almost impossible for someone like me, who grew up on a state education, parents were earning very little, and had many disadvantages. And my way out was education. And I could do that because education used to be free. A university education used to be paid for in this country by the government. When everything changed in the UK with the introduction of university fees, of changes to our budget, which we in the UK used to call the austerity years from 2010 onwards, huge cuts to public services, all of a sudden people who used to have a way out didn't have a way out anymore. And the government has put this new department in called Levelling Up, which is supposed to bring all different areas of the UK up to the same standards as the southeast and London. But at the end of the day, it takes a lot of money to do that, and it also takes a lot of political will. And certainly, Barnabas is not blessed with a lot of money. It certainly doesn't have a lot of political clout in the UK. But I like to think that within Manchester, we have our own will. We have the wish that nobody should have to live on the street, that people should be able to have homes and a dream. They should be able to have a job, a car, go on holiday, do all the same things as the rest of us. For us to do that, it really does mean that we have to overcome a lot of barriers with the people that we work with. And that's the work I'm really interested in. That's really my passion.
And what's the name Barnabas Bean? How does that come about?
Right. So Peter and Beryl, our founders, were Christians, and they didn't know what to call their little fledgling organisation. So one of their churches said, well, in the Bible, St. Paul went out to preach to all these countries, but he needed to be encouraged to do that. He couldn't do it on his own. And a man called Barnabas was asked by God to go and encourage St. Paul. And everybody said to Peter, well, that's what you're doing. You're encouraging people. You're not preaching at people, you're encouraging them. You're walking alongside them. You're taking down the barriers. And really, that's what we are. That's what Barnabas is all about. The odd spelling of our name, because Barnabas is his name in the Bible with an A. A church in Manchester gifted Peter a bus, a double-decker bus, and he was famous for driving it around Piccadilly. He would drive it at night. He had it all changed out so that there were medics on board, because he realised it was very hard in the 90s for people who were rough sleeping to access the NHS. You needed a fixed address. There were all sorts of problems, but they had terrible health outcomes. And Peter was famous for driving this bus, so they said, actually, you should be Barnabas. And we never changed
I love it.
The bus is long gone, but I love the story. And we still have a picture of the old bus. I believe Peter did sell it in 2010 or something like that to another organisation that was doing in the UK that was doing exactly what Barnabas was doing. And I like to think that somewhere it's still trundling about.
Helping people, right?
People, absolutely.
That is a great story. Thanks for sharing that. What challenges have you faced? Because obviously you've got a very mighty mission where you think nobody should be on the street, which I agree with, but it's difficult, isn't it, with all the different constraints? So can you tell us some of the challenges you've had to overcome or you're trying to overcome?
Gosh.
Maybe that'll inspire listeners.
Yes, lots. Just like all charities, we're here for a social purpose that is not fulfilled by, these are the people that fall through the gaps. I think the number one issue is it's the housing crisis. At the end of the day, we're a housing charity. We're about getting people into a home, and the cuts that the government have made to funding for homelessness means that there's less and less emergency beds to go around. Now, in Manchester, we've actually bucked the trend where, in fact, I think our local authority has been absolutely brilliant working with the Department for Levelling Up, what used to be called Departments of Communities and Local Government. And they've had some really good funding to be able to have emergency beds. But the major issue around that, you can have as many emergency beds as you like. If you don't have affordable accommodation for people to move on to from there, actually what will end up is you will need more emergency beds because people can't move on. And that's the thing it's been a real problem for as long as I can remember, that you can put someone into an emergency bed, but that's all it is at the end of the day. It's just somewhere to stay while you're waiting for the rest of your life to carry on. You can't really do anything there. You can't work there. You can't, you're almost like in limbo. And actually you're waiting for this magic moment where hopefully you get a flat or you get a room in a shared house. The rents have been going up ever since I've been at Barnabas, to a point now where we're hearing it's normal for a room in a shared house to cost anywhere up to £650,000 a month. When I started 10 years ago, you could probably rent a whole house for that. So to have just a room means that actually you're trapping people in poverty. People's housing benefit will pay for that. But what it means is that if you agree to take rent at £650 a month, if you get a job, you still have to pay the money. And you probably cannot afford to pay all that money. And you won't get that much more help from the government. I think another issue that we've had really, and again, this is around housing, is actually the standards of housing. We've always been lucky at Barnabas that we've worked with landlords who care about the people that we help, are willing to work with us to improve standards. In fact, have always gone out of their way to make sure that where we house people is fit for housing. But we've come across some absolutely horrific instances of people living in unbelievable circumstances, and we've been very lucky to be able to work with shelter, to be able to tackle those rogue landlords and to try to help people bring the standard of living up. If you live somewhere where you're dealing with damp and you're dealing with rats and you're dealing with windows that are broken, eventually your health outcomes are going to be very bad and you are going to leave that property. So you're going to become homeless anyway. So that's been a major issue. I think another major issue for us, one of the biggest issues that we had to deal with was the introduction of universal credit. Manchester, I think 2 areas of Manchester were the pilot areas for universal credit back in 2014. And we almost instantly saw lots of destitution happen right on our doorstep. We went from people who were paid their benefits every 2 weeks to having to wait 6 weeks for their first monthly payment, and they're not understanding how to budget monthly. That's a real skill, isn't it? Being able to make your money go for the whole month. Oh goodness, I can remember we sometimes we were handing out food parcels like you wouldn't believe, and just the absolute desperation that people felt. That was a horrible thing to get through. The system has improved. The government has listened. It still always needs it needs more help. Really, it needs more feedback. And I guess that we still get lots of problems with universal credit, which I think are completely avoidable. I think one of the other issues we've had is that cuts to services. So it's almost impossible to get people into mental health settings now. We've had instances where people have been really unwell and have been sent 200, 300 miles away to it because that was the nearest mental health bed. So away from their family, away from their networks, away from all the things that matter to them. But that was the only mental health bed, and that was what had to happen. I think the police have ended up acting as the fourth emergency service with regard to mental health, and that's certainly one of the biggest issues that we see is the lack of carried on care for people once they leave a mental health setting. They're pretty much just thrown out and put on their own devices, and I kind of feel, gosh, if I could do anything, I'd make sure there was more care for those people so that they never had to go through that again, and certainly never had to end up back on the streets again. I mean, I could go on forever deeper, honestly. I've got so many stories, but I'll stop there, but you get the idea.
Thank you for sharing that, Yvonne. And I know it's a very difficult subject, and there's so many aspects that you and other worthy charities that we have interviewed in homelessness are tackling. And thank you for what you do. And I hope our listeners can help. What impact have you made so far? 30 years is a long time.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Barnabas has always been a bit of a pioneer charity. I think it's partly because our founder is not very good. He wasn't very good at dealing with authorities or rules, which on the one hand caused lots of problems, but on the other hand was brilliant because he was always thinking about what to do first. Peter very early on recognized the importance of health with homelessness. And that's why it's one of our charitable objectives to preserve the health of homeless people. And we've been very lucky to work alongside Urban Village Medical Practice, which has had outstanding care, primary care for homeless people in Manchester for well over 20 years now. We still have a primary care nurse who comes in and delivers care for the people in our centre. She is also doing, COVID vaccines, flu vaccines, things like that. I can't overestimate the impact of having health in a setting where people feel safe. Things like podiatry, physio, mental health services, drug and alcohol services, all under one roof. It does work, and we know that because there's multiple charities all up and down the country doing the same thing. But Peter was one of the first that really understood the importance of ensuring that health was part of the offer, from the very early days of having medics on the bus. So I'm very proud of that, and it's work that I'm really keen to continue pioneering in. The impact that we've had is also we knew quite early on that we wanted to do something around housing, and we set up a bond guarantee scheme whereby we were working with landlords where we would guarantee the rent and deposit for the people we placed there. And we realised quite early on also we needed some kind of workforce that just went and helped people to become good tenants. Didn't just say, right, pay your bills and take your rubbish out, but actually the whole thing of what you're going to do with your day, how are you going to change your day? Because 3 days ago you were sitting in Piccadilly Gardens. Now you've got to think about what you're going to do today because you don't want to go back to that old way of living. And I'm really proud of our resettlement team. We've got 2 people on the team. And they've got a caseload of 30 between them. They really have created an amazing community of people who support one another, who really understand that it's up to them to grasp it and to, move on. If they can't work, at least find a volunteering job somewhere. There was a gentleman that we helped. He's not probably ever going to be able to work, but he desperately wanted to do a PAT testing course. So that's where you test electrical appliances to make sure they're safe. So we paid for him to do that. And he absolutely loves it. He goes around doing his PAT testing. He comes in to do our PAT testing as well now. And he, that just gives him a focus for his week. Yeah. He might not work all week, but he will go every now and again and say, right, I'm going to go and do the PAT testing for XYZ organisation. And, just to know that he can do something worthwhile with his day. I love that impact. I think the other impact we've had really is we realised that actually you can't do everything on your own. And when I met Hendrix and Risha, who are the founders of Coffee for Craig, back in 2014, I pretty much knew I'd met kindred souls. And I love the way that they came in. They disrupted the partnership because they just kept asking all the time very obvious questions like, why don't we just house people? Or, you would sit in meetings where they were going on and on forever and they'd just say the most obvious things. And I think working with Hendrix and Risha has really taught me to be brave as well. It's taught me to have the same bravery about asking the obvious questions and maybe not always being very polite, which, as a diplomat's wife, you probably understand that, you probably get people to do more by being polite. But sometimes a little bit of righteous anger doesn't go astray. Sometimes just having that moment in the meeting where you say, well, actually, that's just an absolute load of rubbish. And why are we still doing this?
we had Risha on the podcast a season ago, and absolutely they do some really great work as well. And
they are amazing. And I think for me, I take a big leaf out of their book, which is don't be frightened. Don't be frightened to do it. Just go out and do it.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's also like, the status quo we just accepted. Maybe you just need to question it and say, let's take a fresh look. Let's see what we can do. Context has changed. what was the rules a few
Absolutely.
years ago and not the
Absolutely.
rules now. So that's great.
And I think that's something we have to keep doing. I think the pandemic taught us we can, when there is the political will, house everybody. We did during everyone in during that first lockdown. Manchester housed thousands of people and helped. I can't remember. I think it's something like 300 people went on to long term accommodation.
Wow.
And prior to that, they'd had hundreds of people on the street. I think the last count had been something horrific, like 140 people sleeping rough. And the actual numbers are much bigger than that. That's the national count, and there's all sorts of stupid rules that sitting around that which no one understands. But I think I'm constantly now saying, well, we've got to do something different. How can we still be in the 21st century and it's okay for the rough sleeping numbers to go up? Why is that acceptable? I don't think it should be. I think people should be up in arms about it. I think we should be up in arms about everything. And the number of people we've got coming in now who are on the verge of homelessness, they can't afford their energy, they can't afford to eat. So they're looking for hot food. They don't want to be given a food pack because they can't go home and cook it. They haven't got the electricity or the gas because they're on a meter. So they're paying much more for their energy than if they were a householder paying a direct debit. How is that fair? I mean, that's something I'd love to campaign about if I ever found an extra 5 minutes in my day. But it's things like that. It's stupid structural things that make people homeless. And I think that's what I'm interested in challenging. That's what I'm interested in saying. Why would you want to put more people in poverty and then you don't never give them the ladders to climb out? How
Yeah.
does that work? Actually, wouldn't we all as a country benefit if more people were able to climb out of poverty and become, I think the term is something called economic economically not viable. It's something ridiculous. It's to do with the fact that you're contributing to the economy.
Yeah.
And I absolutely believe that actually if we were able to put money into housing, into mental health, into taking care of the barriers that are stopping people, we're stopping people from being useful citizens here, and there's no need for it.
I totally hear you, and yes, I hope I hope there is a day when this problem doesn't exist, and with all the good work you and volunteers and other organizations are doing, I hope that day comes soon. How can interested people reach out to you and learn more? This is when you can give out your website, social media.
Yes, certainly. So we're on all the social media, and I think most of our social media is at Barnabas MCR. Um, and we're on everything you can think of. I think the only thing we haven't done is TikTok, but that's probably to do with the age of the people working at Barnabas, not because of any disinclination. But yeah, the website. So barnabas-manchester.org.uk has got all the information on there. There's information on there about volunteering, about fundraising, about what we do, and obviously, the usual thing about getting in touch with us. But we really do like talking to people on social media as well. I, I'm sure I shouldn't be telling people this, but I am always wombling around on our Twitter account just because I like talking to people. So, I'm always responding to people and, thanking them for what they do and answering questions. So, yeah, please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from people who are interested in hearing more about what we do.
Lovely. What advice would you have for people looking to start something similar in another part of the world or another part of the UK?
Do you know, I think a lot of it is about not allowing yourself to be hemmed in by whatever the local situation is. I think I'd take a leaf out of Coffee for Craig's book, go and talk to people who are already doing similar things. And if there is no one doing similar things, then by all means get in touch with organizations all around the world. There's no reason you can't do that now digitally, to find out what they're doing and find out what the issues are where you are. I can't stress enough how important it is to work with your local authority. all over the world, there'll be people in charge wherever you are, and finding out, what are their constraints? Their constraints, often people like to blame their local authorities for everything, but often local authorities are working under incredible constraints, not just budgetary, but legal constraints as well. Maybe there's a gap there that you could fill. Maybe, your local authority is desperate to be able to provide showers for people. They maybe can't afford housing, but they want at least people. Maybe that's something you could do. And I would definitely go and find out where all the gaps are. I think one of the clever things that Coffee for Craig did was they came in. The sector was already very crowded with charities. Manchester's got so many homeless charities, it's ridiculous. But they came in and they said, well, where's the gap? And they could see the gap was the evenings. The gap was Barnabas used to be open 5 evenings a
Yeah.
week, but we weren't open at a weekend. So Coffee for Craig started off with the weekend, and they have become our de facto evening provision in Manchester. It meant that Barnabas
Yeah.
was able to focus on other things as we moved along, because they came along and made that their own. I think if I was going to tell anybody in another country to do this, I'd say go and talk to as many people as you can and look at where you can be the most use. Are you a campaigner? We need people to be campaigners. We need people to stand up to governments and say this needs to happen, or to local authorities, and to ask questions and ask for information. We need people who are practical and on the ground and delivering, but we need people who are really happy to get onto social media and, raise awareness of the problem as well.
Thank you so much for sharing those tips. It's great advice. Especially, I like the one about talking to your local authority and finding where the gaps are. It's not easy to do, but if you can find the gaps, then you probably add real value, because that the solution doesn't exist in that part of the world. I'd like to give you the opportunity now to talk about anything that I haven't asked you about, anything that Barnabas is focusing on for the next few months.
Sure. Um, Over the next few months, really, we're really focused on this cost of living crisis, and really trying our hardest to ensure that people don't end up sleeping rough. Increasingly, we're having families coming into us, which is heartbreaking when you get under 16s walking through the door with their parents, and their parents are frightened to death. So we're going to be really focusing on trying to understand how to support those families and to get them into accommodation to work better with our local authority. Um, the other thing that's really exciting for us is we've always wanted to have our own property, and we are on the verge. I hope I haven't jinxed it by saying this, but we are on the verge of hopefully buying our first property in Manchester. And I really hope that this is the beginning of our new direction. For a long time, we've been moving towards this much longer term focus of helping people overcome the barriers that they have faced for many years. And by that, I don't just mean housing. I mean, people have often been misdiagnosed. Maybe they were dyslexic and no one picked it up. Maybe they were autistic and it was never diagnosed. We really want to work with people in a much longer term setting, and having our own property is absolutely key to that, because we're not then going to be reliant on landlords saying, well, actually, I might sell this property. It'll be our property. It'll be a home. That's what I want for someone. I don't just want a bed. I want it to be their home. I want them to feel like they can really thrive. So that's super exciting for us. I'm really excited. But yeah, I think there are two main focus for the next 6 months is getting this property up and running, and really starting to understand what we can do to change things for families who are finding themselves literally without anywhere to stay that day.
Thank you for sharing that. I will now move to the signature questions that I ask all my guests. After all, it is Meet the Mancunian. So the first one is, can you describe the Mancunian spirit in one word or one phrase?
Mancunian spirit. I would say ironic. I would say I've never met people who love irony more than the Mancunians. Um, I absolutely adore that dry wit that most Mancunians have. Um, having grown up in London where sarcasm reigned supreme, I found it a very blunt instrument. I love the fact that Mancunians love irony and they understand it and they wield it really well.
Okay, that's a great one to pick. Can you share a Mancunian who inspires you and why? And they can be living or dead.
Well, I think for me, it's probably always going to be the Pankhursts, Emmeline, and I look back and I think, wow, I would have loved to have been. I think if I could go back to anyone, I would have been a suffragette. I would have been throwing myself under the horse somewhere. But I think
For a horse, but yeah.
I know it's very mean, isn't it? But I can't imagine what it must have been like. They were willing to suffer all sorts of horrible things. Being imprisoned and hunger strikes and goodness knows what. I like to think I would have had the same passion, that it would have mattered to me so much that I would have done that. And I think we can answer the question. I'm not on hunger strike for people being homeless, so we can probably say that. But yeah, I think for me, when I moved here and I wanted to know more about the Pankhursts, I think it was an amazing thing to think. Well, I'm living not far away from where all of that that passion and articulation and education came from. So yeah.
Oh, that I've only heard of Emma Pankhurst. Is there a Pankhurst? Is there more than one?
No, no, there were sisters, and I think there were four sisters, and I can't remember all their names. But they were amazing women, and they all played a part in the suffrage movement. But Emmeline was the mum, and then she had four daughters, and they were all involved somehow. But yeah, so even the dad was involved. That's what I like. Even the dad was a feminist. Yeah,
Wow. Oh,
exactly.
okay, that's amazing. I mean, at that in that time and period, that is really amazing. What's the most important life lesson you've learned?
Oh goodness, I don't know how I would pick one. I think the most important life lesson I've learned is listening. I don't think I'm a very good listener. People say I am, but I always think your own head is full of your own story, isn't it? And whatever's preoccupying you. I think listening helps you to be a better human. It helps you to come down to somebody else, instead of sitting up in your lofty throne room in your own head. Uh, it helps you to understand what somebody else is going through. And I don't mean that, just, in a crisis or a trauma situation. I mean, generally, it could be anything. But I think, yeah, Barnabas has taught me that more than anything else. Barnabas has taught me millions of things, but the thing I probably treasure the most is the fact that I get to listen to people. And in my old job, it was just me talking at people as a marketer, not really listening. Now my day is better spent listening to people because I can really solve problems that way.
Oh, it is a really important skill to develop in any field. So kudos to you that you're starting to work on that, and that's a great skill to have, I think. If you could have one superpower, what would that be?
Oh, I really struggle with this.
Uh,
If I could have one superpower, I think I'd like one where I could instantly transmit joy to people. I don't know how I would do it. Maybe I'd touch their heads and they would have they'd be suffused with joy. I don't know. I just feel like there's so much that um, people are taught to focus on the negative, aren't we? Particularly with the media, I feel. Where there's this constant focus on the negative, and I feel like there's so much joy in the world, which is partly what I was so interested in this podcast, because I just wanted to say there's so much more to life than reading the papers or watching the telly and panicking about what's happening to markets. Those things are important, but actually what's really important is to grab those moments of joy, isn't it?
That's right. And I think, the joy comes from little things. It could be the sunrise or the sunset, a moment with your
Yes,
loved
exactly.
one or your dog, depending on the person. And, there's so many little things. That's amazing. I hope you get a magic wand actually, rather than going around touching people. I'm thinking of you with a little magic wand.
Yeah, actually, yeah. In these COVID times, definitely a magic wand.
That's all we have for today, Yvonne. Thank you so much. It's been amazing to talk to you, and I'm really inspired by everything that you're doing, and it's great to know you're collaborating with other uh, homelessness charities to kind of say let's change the equation. It doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think everybody needs to have a little bit of that in their lives, don't they? A little bit of collaboration, some allies to say it's not just you that thinks this way.
Yeah, and I think together we can do more than sitting and trying to do our little corners. So
Yeah,
that's great.
absolutely. Thank you, Deepa. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Yvonne, thank you for talking to me and my listeners. I really enjoyed learning about helping the homeless today. Dear listener, thank you so much for listening to the third episode of the Meet the Mancunian podcast, Season 4. I hope this episode and the podcast itself encourages you to follow your passions, inspired by the amazing Mancunian guests who feature here. Tune in every Tuesday for a new episode or log on to meetthemancunian.co.uk to listen to all the episodes and learn more about my podcasting story. Next week, on Tuesday, 13th December 2022, the Meet the Mancunian podcast talks to Jez Myers about supporting the community and integrating refugees from Ukraine. If you are interested in homelessness, you can listen to other Meet the Mancunian podcast episodes on homelessness featuring Mustard Tree, Coffee for Craig, and two creatives fundraising for homelessness charities. Just log on to the website meetthemancunian.co.uk and choose the episode category of homelessness. Please do leave a review or a voice message on my website meetthemancunian.co.uk. That's www.meetthemancunian.co.uk. It takes only a few minutes. Thank you so much.